I'm gonna try to keep it as quick as possible for y'all. I'm just gonna run through the way I teach TDA in both 7th and 8th grade. It's gonna look a little bit different, especially for the teachers that are in grades 3 and 4. It's gonna look a little bit different from what I do. You might have to adjust some of the language, but the steps that I follow, or the steps that I have kids follow, I think are a really great way to create consistency when approaching the writing process, and including text evidence in response. So the first thing is that I break things down, or I break the TDA process down into 7 steps. And normally on Google Classroom, or even when we do it in person, I'll take a week for the first half for steps 1 through 3, which is the brainstorming or the pre-writing phase. And then we'll take a week to actually go through and write and edit steps 4 through 7. So I'm just going to run through my PowerPoint really quickly. If I'm talking too much, which Miss Foster will tell you I do all the time, just unmute yourselves and yell at me if you have questions, whatever. And I'll pause and answer anything. And I will send you guys all the materials when we're done. So the first thing I like to do, I use this PowerPoint pretty much so anytime I do a TDA, and I'll quickly review it. And you guys can all see my screen? I probably should have asked that. All right. So I break it down into a couple different objectives, and once again into second steps and kind of 2 phases of the writing process. Again, pre-writing, and then actually going through and drafting. The number one thing that I think our kids struggle with the most when they write TDA is this first objective, identifying all the components of a question in order to collect the correct evidence that supports their answer. A lot of the times what happens when students write a TDA is they'll just write a summary of whatever they wrote, or they'll only respond to most TDA questions have multiple components, multiple questions that need to be answered, and they'll only answer 1 or 2 of the questions. So there's no possible way for them to get full credit. So really the pre-writing steps that I'm going to go over are really the most important steps, because it doesn't matter how good of a reader or a writer the student is. If they're not answering what questions being asked, they're not going to get full credit for the assignment, and they're not going to find the evidence they need to find. Then I'll talk a little bit about close reading. If anything is taken away from this PD, I hope it's that students are using similar close reading strategies in the younger grades, so that by the time they get to me, it's kind of water under the bridge, and that we're able to hop into higher level concepts right away. And then we'll talk about just organization, and then actually including evidence in the body paragraphs. So first thing, again, that I'll talk about is step 1. Step 1 of the TDA process in my classroom is identifying all the components of the question. So I break it up into sub-steps, and students actually ask, before they start reading the text, before they do anything, the first thing that I have them do is to look at the question. What do you need to answer? So that can inform them as they start to read, they know what they're looking for. What type of evidence should they be collecting? And then also, this will inform how they're going to organize their paragraph. So if they can identify the questions that they need to answer, let's say there's 2 main questions, well, then they know that each body paragraph that they write is going to answer one of those 2 questions. And then step 2, I like to have the conversation about what's the difference between just reading and close reading, because there are a number of differences. So close reading has to do with gathering meaning and determining the author's purpose. Sometimes students think it's just highlighting important vocab. So they'll highlight entire sections of text, or they'll highlight entire paragraphs instead of actually breaking down that paragraph and only highlighting what's important. And then the most important part of close reading is actually including annotations. So it's a lot easier to do in person when they have an actual printout and they can write in the margins or write directly on a piece of paper. And there's a couple different ways that they can go about annotating, but their annotations should directly connect back to the questions that they're supposed to be answering. So I'm just going to click out of this and I'll show you guys a sample that we just did in my class for an ANET preview. So this is actually an ANET article. And one of the things that I like to do with students is do multiple reads. So the first read that we do might be related to, might have a separate purpose, right? We might just be trying to do basic things like determining the main ideas, determining the characters that are in the text, talking about what the conflict is. So just really basic questions we'll do first, and we'll do that together, and I'll actually annotate and do the highlights and annotations on the screen for them. And they'll be doing most of the thinking. I kind of just ask guiding questions to help them to determine the text. But really they're doing a majority of telling me, you know, what to highlight and what my annotations on the text should say. So once again, I'm not going to go, I'll send you guys this sample. But this is kind of what we do. And then at the end, it's a nice opportunity when you're done you're done multiple reads of the text to just do a quick summary of all the main ideas. It's a nice way to review what the text was mostly about. So down here, we just kind of summarized everything that was in the text.
And Mr. Hudak, could I stop you right there? Mm-hmm. And guys, one of the things that I've been trying to work on, making sure we're having the opportunity to see, is oftentimes we go right into the text with one read. And it's pretty difficult to go into the text with one read if you're dealing with vocabulary that the kids may struggle with, and you haven't pre-read the text or pre-pulled out all the vocab and all the difficult language. Pull it out and do the pre-read for yourself. But doing multiple reads, the first read is, like Mr. Hudak said, it's just informational. It can be that plain read and tell me what you read. Tell me, you know, what came up. What are you thinking about? What does this text make you think about? The first read can be just that simple. It's done on their own, or it can be done chorally in the classroom. But it's just read it, let them get through it, pre-teach the vocab and anything that you see that may be of some difficulty for them, so that they can have a clean first read. Then you go back in and we get into our close read. That's when we gain the most understanding of what was happening in the text. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll say two things in response to that too before we move on. So again, it's the perfect opportunity when you do read one to actually do it with your students. And then read two, I like to put them in breakout groups and have them attack that TDA question and really start to pull information out. So this is our first read that we did together, just doing that basic, what's the main idea? Who are the characters? What's the setting? And what's the conflict or the problem in the text? Yeah, Dr. Stout, I hear you. I definitely hear you with that. Like, it's boring. We read this. I just try to approach it with like, even if you can throw like videos or whatever that go along with the text, like background video stuff in between the two reads.
Yes.
And that's why I like to do it 2 separate weeks as well.
Yes.
I'll do 1 week with the read and throw some videos, whatever else in their background knowledge. And then before I do the second read, I'll do the same thing.
Right. And I kind of, you know, as I said, we're trying to tell them, just like Ms. Foster said, we can reread a text and we have different purposes in mind. And I might, you know, try to get them on board with me before I start hearing the, oh my goodness, I already read this. Do we have to read it again? It's like, okay, who remembers why we read it previously? Now, when we read it, I want us to do this. So you can keep this in the back of your mind because, of course, that's background knowledge, right? And you you use the buzzwords, and this is what they should be able to identify in, you know, the academic classroom. But it's like, you know, I guess at 4th grade, they just really, like, I read this, there's nothing else that you can tell me about this, even though, you know, obviously the different purposes, like, they're necessary. And it's just a fight. It's just a fight. But I hear you, though, like, we have to do it, and I do try to do it, but adding the videos, adding maybe interactive things like games or game shows, things like that, try to make it a little bit more interesting for them. But it's just a fighting thing.
I hear you.
As you're continuing with your comments, please put any questions or comments you have in the chat, and we'll keep the chat and then come back and definitely be able to answer those questions and things.
Yeah, and like I said, I hear you. And once again, my materials are for middle grade students. They're tailored to that specific group. So you might only take like certain things from this, or you might have to tailor, you know, what I'm doing for your grade level of students. So step 3, and this is a really important step as well. And like I said, I put more emphasis and probably spend more time on the pre-reading before students actually start writing. Students, when they do their second close read, and normally for me, they do it in small groups, and I'll just go in and check in with them and make sure they're on task. They should be collecting their evidence while reading. It's not something they should be doing while writing. Like, I'm going to start writing, and then I'm going to hop back into the text and find my evidence and then go back to writing. Like, eliminating that back and forth process is something that I found to be really beneficial for kids. So as they're doing that second read, they can be pulling out the evidence in their annotations that goes along with those TDA questions that they need to answer. So I'll just show you guys what some of the student work. I'll just pull up a student's work for this assignment. We'll do Delon. So again, we explicitly go through the question, and I have them highlight what they're supposed to be answering in the question. And then they'll go through and actually type out their evidence onto the Google Doc. And they'll tell me in the evidence, hold on, let me find it here. Once they give me the evidence for each question, they'll then tell me why they selected that evidence before they start writing. So they'll pull the evidence out of the text that goes along with each of the questions, and I have the question prompts posted there for them. They'll post it, and then they'll explain why they're including that evidence in their piece. So essentially, before they even start writing, most of their body paragraphs are written. They just have to put all of that information together and make it flow. So then when they're actually doing the draft, they can focus on transition words and on making it flow instead of that hopping back and forth again from the text to their writing piece.
All right. And Mr. Hudak, let me add in here. One of the things I want you guys to notice is what Mr. Hudak is doing is he's going and pre-reading the text, and he's creating his own questions of what he wants the kids to do. And we have Pearson and Harcourt. They actually give you a big, I actually watched Ms. Edmonds do a great lesson with some informational text dealing with mammoths. The information was so much, and it's crammed in there. And then they actually want the kids to answer 20 questions. So what you want to do is kind of pick out the questions you might want to answer or create your own that's going to bring about what you want the kids to understand from the text. 20 questions is way too much. That number in itself is overwhelming, especially after a difficult informational text read. So we kind of want to begin to go in earlier, and you can actually begin picking out questions you want, and you can answer some of the other questions on your own for the kids, but then pick out specific ones that you want them to answer, or you create them yourself where it'll begin to focus them where you want them to be.
And I'll say too, along with that, ANET is very, very helpful to pull question stems from. There's a question stem
Yeah. Yes.
on ANET for texts that you can apply to any text that you're reading. So that's really helpful. And also keep in mind that your TDA should, or really any reading that you're doing, should be focused on one or two standards. And I normally, like, I say this to Melissa and to the people when we're doing network-wide PDs all the time, like, read a text 2 or 3 times and focus on 1 or 2 things instead of trying to do a million things, because kids are just not going to be able to process that much information at once, whether they're in high school or whatever. It's just too much at once. But the other important thing is I always make sure for the pre-reading and for the post-reading that I post a model. They really need to see a model of the work and what it looks like. And it's a lot of pre-work. It's a lot of planning. But like for my first one here, here's my evidence for question 1 that I pulled out. And then I made sure to give them an example of exactly what I'm looking for. So they can see, you know, my example here, and they have a model for what they're going to do when they pull that evidence out in this piece. All right, so I'm gonna hop back. Give me 1 second. So that's the first part. Any questions about steps 1 through 3 at this point? It seems like a lot to take a whole week to do pre-writing, but it will save you a lot of headaches in the long run to do that much pre-work.
But one of the good things about it is it gives you, at the end of this, it gives you not only you taking the class through the writing process, right? But it also gives you not only them having to use textual evidence to answer all those questions, but at the end of it, they give you a 3, 4, 5 paragraph essay. So it's a writing piece for you as well. So everything that you give them textually to read could also end with them doing some writing to answer questions about that text. That may be 1, 2, or 3 paragraphs. So now when you're trying to meet that writing responsibility for each quarter, you already have it from your readings.
Yeah, and I know sometimes it's a struggle because as ELA teachers, we have so much to grade between reading and writing. It's helpful. Like 1 TDA, I'll break up into like 10 different assignments for writing. So
absolutely.
Even though technically you're only, it's only 1 grade, you can break it up based on the steps and give them like 7 to 10 grades just for 1 writing piece. So now we're hopping into the actual, if it wants to load, into the actual draft portion of the TDA. So now students have their evidence. They know the questions that they're supposed to be answering. Now we're actually going to go through and draft out our essays. So, and I break it up into intro, body, and conclusion. Intro tends to be pretty quick, but normally what I'm asking them to do, and you guys might have your own kind of breakdowns or procedures or whatever for, I think tag is one. I try to stay away from that in middle school. But for your kids, that's probably a great one that you use already. They're restating the question from the prompt in some way. I try to get them to use the title of the text and the author's name somewhere in their intro. They're providing like 1 to 2 sentences of background information. So that's where that read 1 comes in handy, because they're taking the main ideas that we already did together from our annotations, and they're able to just incorporate those main ideas, the summary, right into their intro. And then the last thing we do, and I would love for this to be a conversation in earlier grades, is a thesis statement. Like, I would love to have kids come into 7th and 8th grade knowing what a thesis statement is, because I actually, one of my housemates is a college professor at Westchester, and sometimes in their writing emphasis courses with college students, they have to spend time talking about what a thesis statement is. And that's crazy to me, because if you can write a good thesis, the rest of your paper is going to be excellent. So really, summarizing what the response is going to be about. So you're giving a summary, the main idea of the text, but then you're doing a thesis statement, what your writing is going to be about, and it drives the rest of the writing piece. So that's probably the most important step for the introduction paragraph, is really emphasizing that word thesis so that they know that vocabulary word when they go into the later grades. So that's the intro. So body paragraph, step 5, draft your body paragraphs. Again, if there is only one, and this is what I tell students, if they're only asking you one question in the TDA, then you really only need one body paragraph, so long as you write it effectively. But for the upper grades, I tell them there will never be just one question. There will always be 2 or 3. So any question that is asked in the TDA should be accompanied by a body paragraph. So basically, stating your point, what you're going to prove in that specific paragraph, right? So a topic sentence, which you might have to teach in a mini lesson or explicitly. Then you're taking those pieces of evidence that you already did in the pre-writing, and you're just incorporating them into a sentence into your body paragraph, right? So they already have their text evidence that goes along with the question they're answering. Now they just need to put it into a sentence and add it into their body paragraph. And the most important thing, this is like kind of like Dr. Stout's pet peeve. This is the thing that crushes my soul. It hurts me, where they put a piece of text evidence in and they'll just stack text evidence, right? They'll put like 4 or 5 pieces of text evidence in a row. They need to explain their evidence in their own words. So when you put a piece of text evidence in there, that doesn't automatically mean like, cool, I can move on to the next one. The person who's reading my essay knows exactly why I put it in here. Like you have to explain in detail, why did I include that piece of text evidence into my response, and expand on your idea. Because the author of the piece already wrote their text. Now the person who's reading your essay needs to know what you think about it. Why did you include it? You need to prove that you know what you're talking about. So I talk to my example for kids all the time is like, you need to prove that you are an expert when someone is reading your piece. And then finally, again, another word that I'm sure Miss Stout Dr. Stout hammers into her kids along with all of you, but transition words. In that last sentence, transitioning from one paragraph to the next. So that's the body paragraph. And then the conclusion, talking about concluding words, just like you can talk about transition words. What do conclusion words look like? And this is just re-summarizing everything you talked about. I tell kids all the time, it can be it's similar to the introduction paragraph. The only difference is you're incorporating concluding words into it. So that one's pretty simple. Tends to only need to be like 3 or 4 sentences. Kids don't need to go crazy in the conclusion paragraph if they do an effective job in the intro in their body. So they're just re-summarizing everything that they wrote in the body paragraphs.
So Dr. Stout, I see your comment in the chat. So you're saying that this never ends. I'm going through the same exact issues. And you know what's funny? I think from 3rd grade and up, we go through those same issues.
Yes.
But what we're trying to do now is, where I'm trying to get proactive, is finding a way for us to say, we've hammered this issue as a building and we're going to stop it. This TDA process forces them to have to write, and you get an opportunity to grade them in those 7 steps. There are even more steps if you want to add to them, right? But within each step is a piece that you can grade them on. It can be writing that paragraph as an assignment for turning it in, and then as an assignment for checking for grammar and language, your language standards. You can also have them in their read 1, go through and find any vocabulary words they don't understand. have them turn that list into you and write those definitions down in the sentence they're in. Now they begin to gain understanding of how words impact sentences, sentences impact paragraphs, and so on. So there's so many things you can do. What I'm trying to do is get the school to realize early on that we can deal with citing textual evidence and writing early through just having them going through and analyzing some of what they're reading. Third grade is central idea and main idea, right? So if they're learning how to read a small passage and look for the main idea and given all these keywords and steps and then asked to write a sentence, then being given that work back saying this sentence isn't adequate enough, you got to add some details to the sentence, you know, then they learn how to write better sentences in grade 3. Is it easy? No. It's my summer before my school year's preparation. It's me taking those 2 months to prepare all of this stuff, get it all organized, get the pre-reads, get everything done, then I can come in and just go right to work. So it's the intellectual prep that's really important. If we can get ahead of it, this is what we can do. What I always told kids was, and it's going to show my age, I used to tell them, they're the chalk and I'm the palm olive. As long as you keep,
go ahead with your pop sayings.
Long as you keep sitting in there with me, it's going to soak in.
Yes.
You'll get it.
Yes. What does that mean? I'm like, is it a Popeye joke?
I ain't never heard
Dish
that.
liquid is going to get soaked up. The chalk is going to soak it up.
Y'all never seen that commercial? The babies haven't seen it, Dr. Stout.
Oh my goodness. Am I that old?
How many channels were on the TV when that was a commercial?
Palmolive was also used to soak and soften your nails before cutting.
Yes, come on.
Right.
What was her name? Madge? Was her name Madge?
I think so. Here, Madge, just put them in there.
Right, just put them in. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, anyway. Was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Whatever.
all 3 of them. Miss Edmonds knows what we talk about.
Right? She's being quiet over there. Like, don't make me a part of that.
Palmolive was then what Dawn is today.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah. All right. So the reason you don't see step 7 on my 2 assignments that I posted to Google Classroom is this is something that they do. I'll post the checklist with it, but this is something I post after they're done with the writing and I grade it so that they can read my feedback and they can go back in and edit their response and get points added back to their grade if they're unhappy with their grade. So I'll post this with the drafting steps, but this is something additional that they'll do after to earn points back. And then I'll just show you really quickly. One of the things I also do is we'll take a look at student work. I'll just erase their names out and make a TDA for students that are actually in the class. And we'll go through what does a 4 response look like? And we'll read through some of it and I'll ask them, why is this a 4 response? Then we'll go to a 3 response. Why is this a 3? Why is this a 2? Why is this a 1? Right? So we'll actually go through and look at student responses so they'll know who's who. The person who got the 4 always says, oh, I got the 4. So kids know that we're looking at actual responses, but I take the names out so, kids don't know who wrote what unless they say something about it. And I always post a student-friendly version of the PSSA rubric so that they have these words in their mind and the description of how to get what is a little bit simpler to understand for students. So I also go through that. If for the drafting step, again, my number 1 piece of advice is you really need to take the time to write a model yourself that responds to the prompt. You really need to take the time to write a model response yourself so that, number 1, they know that a lot of the time when I didn't do this, they would ask me, Mr. Hudak, you got us you know, writing this, but you didn't even write one yourself was what I got a lot. You didn't even take the time to write one yourself. How do we know what ours is supposed to look like? But they really do need to see what a 4 response looks like so that they have something to work from. So that if there's any takeaway for any of the steps, again, just writing a model response for students that they can read through and kind of reference as they're going through the drafting steps. I think that's pretty much so all I have. Again, one of the things that we'll do, I'll just open up another random person.
Hey, Mr. Hudak, I want you to share with all the grades sample close reads and just how you annotated them, and also how a few kids may have annotated theirs differently. So if you can put that in what we send out, that would be good as well.
Yeah, and I'll try to put a couple student responses in. I might not send the email today because I actually need to grade these essays.
No, that's fine.
But just taking a look once again, I'll go through their essays, and I always provide feedback in the private comments. Devine said this is probably her worst TDA, probably because she waited until last minute to write it. But we'll go through and we'll take a look at their responses. And again, I'll share a model of a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. So if I had to guess, just looking at how she wrote this, it seems like she did a pretty good job. At least I see 4. I see intro, body, conclusion. I see quotes, so I know she included evidence in here. So it's probably at a minimum a 3 or a 4, as long as she answered the question that's being asked. But because we spend so much time doing those first 3 steps of pre-writing, normally kids are pretty spot on with the question that they're answering. So yeah, I'll share a couple student samples with you guys. I'll share the PowerPoint that I always refer to, and my annotations and my sample response. I'll just make sure I put that all in one place for you. But yeah, that's pretty much so what I have. If anybody has questions or feedback from me, or what we think we should do as a team, we can definitely talk about that.